Satin stitch can be a little bit tricky to set up, but once you've got it working, can add a real beautiful look to the edges of your applique, or if you want to give a bit of creative flair to your seams, satin stitch may be the way to go. But if you are struggling setting up your machine, I've got you covered in this video. So who am I? I am Kim. This is Quilt with Kim. You are very welcome. Let's go find out how to set up your machine and how to get the perfect satin stitch. To do your satin stitch, then you're going to need a couple of things. So you obviously need your fabric, and I've just got a little sample here just to show you. So normally you will have a piece that's appliqued on the top here. Not always, it might be a seam that you're satin stitching over, but I've just got a little piece of fabric on top of my yellow here, just so you can see what I'm doing. You definitely need some stabilizer. Now, this is a stitch and tear stabilizer. You can get an iron-on stabilizer that you just take off afterwards. It's a very temporary fabric stabilizer here, so it's almost like paper, and if I tear it, which you can do pretty easily, that's what you want to happen, is you want to be able to tear it away easily afterwards. But this is really important. It's quite thick, it doesn't stay on underneath your fabric. As I said, it tears away afterwards, but what you need this for is to stop your fabric all bunching up when you're doing the satin stitch, because your machine won't really like doing all those teeny tiny stitches without anything sitting behind it to support and stabilize your fabric, which is why it's called stabilizer. So you need your stabilizer. It is as cheap as chips. You can get it at any haberdashery. You can get it very easily online at Amazon. Just look for stabilizer, fabric stabilizer, and you want, as I said, the stitch and tear or sew and tear or press and tear it's called. You want the one that you tear off. So you need some of that, and you're going to need your open toe foot. It depends on your machine, but generally you need an open toe foot, because what we will be doing is a zigzag stitch, which is going from side to side. So you need your little aperture, or a little hole here where the needle goes. You need that little bit wider than perhaps your standard foot. Oh, just one thing about the stabilizer, just before we get onto the machine, is that you can pretty much reuse this. So if you're stitching, so I would be stitching down here, I will carefully tear the rest of it away, and I'll have all sorts of little bits and pieces left over, because you only need a little bit to go behind things sometimes, depending what you're doing. So get yourself some of this. It's brilliant stuff to have anyway. So what we are going to do is have our stabilizer. We're going to put that behind our fabrics. So this is going to be my main body fabric, whatever that is, and this is the applique piece, or the bit that we're going to satin stitch over the edge. So I've got that ready to go. If you've got a large area, I would probably just pin this stabilizer in place. I'm not going to bother particularly because it's just a small piece, but generally I would stick a pin there and a pin there just to hold it in place whilst I'm stitching. So I'm going to put my open toe foot on the machine, and then we're going to have a look at the machine and what settings we need for our satin stitch. First things first, we are going to put our machine onto our zigzag stitch here. So I'm going to press number 5, which is my button on the front of my machine, for a zigzag. And if you look, it defaults then, so it tells me that I've got a zigzag going on, and then defaults to a 3.5mm stitch width. That means it'll swing your needle from left to right with 3.5mm between the left and the right, and I'll show you that in a minute. And then we've got a stitch length of 1.4. Now that's how far apart your zigzags are. So the spaces in between these zigzags will be 1.4mm. Now that is the standard zigzag setting for this machine, but what we want to do is close those zigzags up. So I'm going to reduce my stitch length to as close as we can get to 0. So you may not get to 0, but you'll probably get to, I can't actually see what I'm doing in the camera. I might get to 0.2 or 3, but you can experiment with this. So I'm going to keep it as 0.2, so that's 0.2 millimeters, because a satin stitch is where the lines, the zigzags, are so close together it just looks like one continuous line, which you'll see in a second. Now this bit here, the 3.5, is really up to you, and you can experiment with how wide you want your satin stitch to be. So I'm going to leave it there for a moment to show you, but we're going to experiment going up and down to see what happens. So let's get my piece of little fabric sample under the machine to show you what happens there. I have positioned my little sample here with the edge of my pretend applique in my case. So the edge of this piece of fabric on the top, or my applique, is in between the centre gap of my open toe foot there. If I got it positioned there, then I know when I've got the swing of the needle, when it's doing its zigzag or when it's doing its satin stitch, it will go either side nice and neatly, either side of that raw edge there. Okay, so I've put the presser foot down, is ready to go. I'm going to pop the needle down. Now this setting here is just on the standard 3.5 mil setting, which is where the machine has put it to. And if you remember, we reduced the stitch length down to 0.2. So we're going to start to experiment to see what happens and whether we like our satin stitch at that setting. And therein lies a hot tip, is you want to be playing on a little sample bit first to make sure that you're happy with whatever the look and feel of your satin stitch is before you let yourself loose on your actual project. So all we're going to do is, our job is to make sure that this edge here keeps in between the middle gap of my open toe foot, or in the middle section of the open toe foot. It depends on your machine. Mine is a brother and it's got a little gap in the foot here in between the two bits of perspex, but yours might have a little marker or something, but that's what you're looking for, is the center. So as I start going, my job is literally to keep that raw edge of my applique in between that little gap. Now I've done a few stitches here and I'm going to take it out to show you, to say, do I like that or not? And you may think that's absolutely fine and it might be good to go, and that's all you may need to do. Or you think it's not actually big enough, I don't like it. So what I'm going to do is put my my zigzag, my stitch width up a little bit. So I'm going to put it up to 5. So let me just move the camera so I can show you what I've done. So can you see here, I've put that up to 5 now, and I'm just experimenting. So there's no right or wrong with this. This is entirely up to you and the look that you want. So I haven't changed that 0.2 mil, but I am going to see what it's like with a 5, and obviously my threads come away from itself, and as is always the case when there's a camera involved, it's going to have a little mind of its own. Okay, so off we go. So this is now a stitch width of 5. We're going to do exactly the same thing. We're just going to keep this edge of our applique in the middle, and then off we go. And you can see already it's a lot wider, and can you see how those stitches are staying really close together? Actually, you may not be able to see that on the camera. I'll just stop here and I will show you. Okay, so can you see here that, oops, sorry, I'm now knocking everything. Stop that for a moment. So that is my 5 mil stitch width. Okay, so you can see I've now got a classic satin stitch. So it's on the 0.2 millimeter in the stitch length. So that's the distance between each of these little zigzags, if you like. I don't know what you call a bit of a satin stitch. Maybe it's a sat or a satin. But in between each of these lines is kind of 0.2 millimeters, but it's nothing as far as we're concerned. But the distance between there and there is 5 mils, and you can see how much bigger it is than our 3.5 up here. So I personally think that's a bit better because it shows off a little bit more the satin stitch as we go around the applique. What I'm going to do is amend the stitch length just to show you what happens when I increase that a little bit. This is your classic satin stitch, but let's see what happens when I increase my stitch length. So I'm going to put that up to, I'm going to put it up to 0.4. Let me just show you what I've done so you know I'm not cheating. Okay, so it's 0.4. Siri's coming up on the screen. Let me just get rid of Siri, hang on. Sometimes it's just better to hold things. So there we go, we're up at our 5 mil stitch width, but now I've increased the stitch length up to 0.4 here. So let's see what happens with that. Okay, so let's drop the needle. Same thing again, I've got the edge of my applique or fabric, or if it's over a seam, you would have your seam line going through there. And then let's see what happens here. So this is now 0.4 mil. And it's actually stitching a bit quicker, which it would do because it's going further apart, and we're just getting to the edge there. And then let's have a look at that to see the difference. So can you see we've got a classic satin stitch here, but when I increased my stitch width to 0.4, can you see that that's a little bit further apart? Just there. Okay, so you might want that effect. As I said, there's absolutely no right or wrong. This is creativity now. But that's the classic satin stitch when it's close together. That one is a bit further apart. You may feel that that one is better for you. But my key takeaway for this is a very basic satin stitch. This is just to get you going. I'm not going to teach you how to go around on corners just on this particular video because that's a whole exercise in itself. But what I want you to do is experiment and play with your stitch width, so that bit, and your stitch length to see what option that you prefer and what works best for your project. And then, as I said, all your job is to make sure that you keep the edge of your applique or the edge of your piece of fabric in between or in the middle of your open toe foot, and then that'll keep it nice and steady and straight. So when you've finished experimenting and playing and getting it just right, and then you've done your satin stitch on your real project, when you've finished, then you want to be taking this stabilizer off. So let me just move the camera and I'll show you how to do that. So it's called stitch and tear for a reason, because this is our reverse. This is the front and this is the reverse. And then all we're going to do simply is just tear it, and then we're going to tear it very gently. Now, the great thing is the needle perforates the stabilizer, so it is actually very easy to just tear this away, just like that. So you'd want to tear all of this away. You don't want to leave any there. So the back of your fabric, I'm doing this a bit quick, but and you'd want to get rid of all of these bits as well. So if they're a bit fiddly, then use your scissors to very carefully cut the stabilizer away, but very careful, don't cut the backs of the stitches because you will cry. I promise, you will cry. There we go. So we basically don't want to see any of the white. There. We want to cut all this away carefully. So it's actually very satisfying to pull all that away. Now these little bits here, do you remember I said keep all the little odds and sods that you get, because you can still use these bits on something else as long as it's behind your stitch line. That's enough there. So it's really it's really environmentally friendly. I don't know if it's environmentally friendly. I may be talking out my backside, but it's really easy to reuse and very economical. That's probably the better word, isn't it? Very economical. So anyway, I hope that has helped you to get to grips with the basics of satin stitch. Please let me know if you've got any questions. I will cover going around corners in a separate video because it is quite long and I need you to follow it along with me. But for now, I hope that has helped. Please don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the notification bell because it really helps to give you free tuition out here in YouTube land. And I will love you and leave you for now. Bye.